So we'll begin this video with question, where are we at here? Sorry about that, question 8. And what question 8 asks you to do is to use a while loop in order to do basic user input validation. So I didn't give you a particular example in the problem description, but I showed you one in the code here. And this is a different kind of style than I showed you how to do user validation before. This is an appropriate style to use if you want to display the same message regardless of how many times someone has entered an incorrect input. In that case, what you can do is just set a valid flag to 0 initially, and then you can just place all of the actual user input calls inside the while loop. So if you set valid to 0, not valid will be 1. So while 1 will at least run one time. And then you can ask the user for the input, and then you can simply check whether or not the valid condition has been satisfied afterwards. If it hasn't been satisfied, this loop will just keep running and running. But if it is, the loop will terminate after one iteration. So let's actually see how that would work in practice here. And here we go. And when I copy and paste, if you notice, I lose some of the formatting. And in addition, I have the actual quotations here are red and underlined, meaning MATLAB thinks it's a syntax error, but really all that was a copy and paste error. So if you take this code and you run it, notice that, again, since valid is initialized as 0, not valid would be 1. It will at least run one time. If I enter something out of range now, it will just keep giving me the same prompt. But if I enter something in range, of course, the loop will terminate. And the reason I'm seeing that logical 1 is I didn't have a semicolon here. But note I'm using isMember in order to check whether or not the input is valid, because here I didn't just ask them to enter a value between 1 and 5. I asked for an integer. So what this code is doing is it's seeing whether the user input is a member of the array 1 colon 5 will be all the integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And if you don't remember that, I'm sure you do because we just talked about it with the for loop. You can see it here. So it's basically checking is the number that the user entered in this set. And if that is true, valid will be set to 1 and the loop will actually terminate. So just a little bit of a different way to do validation checking than we've done previously. So number 9, write a sentence describing the fundamental difference between a for and while loop. Remember that you use a for loop whenever you have a block of code that you want to execute repeatedly for a fixed or predetermined number of iterations. So iterations is the word that you usually hear in programming to describe code running multiple times over and over. Versus a while loop, as you see in that example that we just did, it's going to be very good for executing a code block repetitively until a condition is met. In this case, the condition was that valid user input was actually entered. And it's one of those days where you just know you're going to spell it wrong. So you just spell it wrong intentionally and see what happens. So last question, be able to perform a 2x2 standard and element-wise matrix multiplication by hand and verify in MATLAB. Remember that what element-wise multiplication does is as long as the sizes match, it's going to take on an element by element basis and create a new matrix where each element is just a product of the matching elements in the old matrix. So let's actually show what that is. If I have a matrix here, say A, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have a matrix B, and it is, 1, 1, and 2, 2. Let's actually leave the semicolons off. That way we can see what these physically look like here. And let's make the command window a little bit bigger. There, if you notice, A in row 1 is has a 1 and then a 2, and in row 2 it has a 3 and a 4, and then B is 1, 1, 2, 2. So if I want to multiply these on an element by element basis, what that will do is it will create a new 2x2 matrix where the element in row 1 column 1 is just going to be the element in row 1 column 1 of A, which is 1, times the same element in B. Row 1 column 1 is also 1, so that would be 1. And then for the row 1, column 2 element, it'll just multiply these two things together, 2 times 1. So the actual first row will be just 1 times 2, since B's first row is 1 times 1. For the actual second row, I'll multiply 3 by 2, which will give me 6, and I'll multiply 4 by 2, which will give me 8. And the way that I actually do that multiplication is the dot times. And if you notice, that gives us exactly what we expected. Versus if I were to actually just compute A times B, notice that those won't be the same results. And the reason they're not the same results is A times B executes standard matrix multiplication. So what that's going to do, for example, for the element in row 1 and column 1, is it's going to take the first row of A, 1, 2, and take a dot product with the first column of B. So 1, 2, dot 1, 2 is going to be 1 times 1, which is 1, plus 2 times 2, which is 4, and 1 plus 4 is 5. So that's how you're getting that element there. You're doing an element-wise dot product using standard matrix multiplication. So hopefully that is going to be a pretty easy exam. As I mentioned, none of it's going to be time. It's all going to be take-home. So take your time on it. I know you're balancing a lot this week with finals, and I'm going to make it due on probably Saturday. That way you can have a little bit of the weekend too if you need it. So I'll talk to you all soon. Have a great week.